On today's podcast, I've got a friend of mine that grew up in different generations. He's a guy that I've looked up to for, I don't know, maybe a decade. I taught a class with him, a church class, and just really felt like this is a role model, someone that you can look up to, someone that is a smart guy, a successful guy, someone that is also just really open and honest, and is a guy that has good conversations and is open to conversation. He's a doctor. He's a physician. He's held many roles doing that. Currently, he works as a chief medical officer for a benefit group. He's just a really good guy and someone that I've looked up to, and I felt like someone I've really wanted to have on the podcast. When I've thought about this podcast, thought about bringing voices to whoever listens. This is the type of person that is inspiring and also is knowledgeable and really knows what they're talking about. So we range from kind of social issues and kind of what's going on in the country and in the environment of politics. Don't really get into deep politics because who wants to do that all the time? I know I don't. So we don't hit too much into that, but we do talk about society. And then we dive into COVID quite a bit, and him having a background, being a physician, really opened my eyes to a couple things that I have not thought of, some of the reasoning behind the things that we're doing. And I really think it's a good listen. It's a worthwhile listen. If you are battling with a lot of the issues that present us with COVID, and a lot of what's been thrown at us in terms of media and divisiveness and things like that, a really steady hand and perspective from Chris here. So if you don't subscribe to the podcast, that'd be awesome if you do. If you like it, share it with your friends. That'd be appreciated too. And if you're interested on being on the podcast, shoot me a message on Instagram at @TheRealDarrenJohnson, and I can get in touch with you that way. That seems to be a really good way to do it. So anyway, my friend Chris, really good guy and a really solid perspective on many things. Have a listen.
One of the interesting forces I've been thinking about this morning is, and you can stop me and say we need to start doing something else anytime, but when I was a kid, I remember advertising was mostly about sort of either being cool or having something that other people were getting that you didn't have yet. Like muscle cars or televisions or the latest appliance for the kitchen. And my parents were older. My mom was like 39 when she had me. My dad was 40. And when sex started to become part of advertising, they were really upset about that. And it wasn't blatant back in the day. It was, just, a woman with a dress that went off her shoulders, hockey thing, right? But they were like, why are we doing this? And the response was, essentially, it's engaging. It engages the consumer. The phrase was sex sells. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we knew 15 years ago in advertising was that anger engages and hatred engages much more strongly than sex. You've got to be in a calm place, to engage in sex, where you got to take your battle armor off and put your sword down and wipe the blood off your face.
Yeah.
But these artificial intelligence bots that really show us in Google News. It started with Google News. That's where
Yeah.
I was really aware of it, but then moved into all the social media streams. Just kind of say, well, what are you interested in looking at? Oh, you're interested in that.
Hmm.
Oh, you thought it was neat that somebody got
Yeah.
knocked out at WFC. I'll show you more of that.
Yeah.
And pretty soon, the things that we're clicking on, mostly because they shock us, and then they say, "Oh, you think that's shocking? I'll show you something even more shocking that's more engaging." And I've watched people, you know, trend towards much more extreme opinions, um, and it seems that they're almost unaware of those forces that are leading them there. And
I
it's about advertising and drawing people in. And if we don't, I like what you're doing, because if we don't step away from that automatic showing of anger and hatred and fighting and whatever it is that engages us. I'm sure some of it is sexual. Probably it's more violently sexual than it was in the 70s when we were showing shoulders and ankles.
Heaven forbid. Yeah.
You know,
That's interesting because I
hmm,
this image comes into my head so much the pat when we're talking about like politics and social like persuasion and things like that. We've always kind of had this idea of a pendulum like going back and forth.
hmm,
Like, we kind of go this way a little bit and then people say, that's a little too much. Kind of like what you're saying, the UFC stuff. You'll scroll through stuff and then it seems like as it gets a little bit too much, you kind of, okay, I'm going to something else. And then the computer or the algorithm kind of learns that and says, okay, that's too much. So we'll dial it back and then feed the things that they like. But nowadays, I feel like it's not a pendulum where it kind of goes back and forth from point of view. It's more like a wrecking ball. It's like it just plows through everybody and then there's nothing left. And then it's like, okay, let's plow through everybody this way. And then there's nothing left. And then in the middle, everybody's kind of like, well, I'm kind of on the fence here. I don't like this and I don't like that.
yeah,
But you've completely destroyed everything in the middle. And now I have to choose this side or choose that side. And I just want to be here.
yeah, yeah.
I don't want to be on either side. I just want to be sitting here and kind of form my own opinions based upon, reading and spirituality and different things, but yet
Talking with other humans like you're doing,
interacting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a lost art almost.
So, what do you think, just kind of dovetailing off what you're talking about, what do you think is really, I guess, do you think it's social media? Do you think it's media in general? Do you think it's politics? What is it that's kind of persuading people to kind of choose sides and go against each other?
No, that's a really good question. You know, I think one of the factors, I don't know the answer to that question, but the thing that comes to my mind right away, one of the factors I think is greed, and wanting to have time and attention and money. I remember my views. I grew up in a conservative family with, uh, my father was a banker and sort of had, Republican views. His father, I'm not sure he wasn't a communist. Could have been. I mean, I remember hearing, I didn't know him very well. I was probably 7 when he passed. But I remember him saying, we should honor the labor of other people. Every man's work is as good as any other man's work, and everybody should make the same amount of money every day. Everybody should make $6 a day. And as a kid, I was like, okay, that makes sense. You're just listening to your grandpa talk, right?
And as a kid, that makes sense because everything's about fairness as a kid. Everything's
Yeah,
about, well, that's not fair, or, your sibling got this and you didn't get that, or everything. They don't think in terms of like age or progression or anything like that. They just think in terms of everything should just kind of be the same.
yeah, that's fair, right? You look around and you see your parents saying, well, so and so has such and such. Should we get one of those?
Yeah.
You can kind of feel those forces, and that makes sense as you grow up and you go, no, wait a minute, everybody should make $6 a day. What?
Hmm.
What about people that are working harder than other people? What should they make $6? And you start to question and change. But the thing that really started to trouble me, Darren, a couple decades ago, was this sort of anger rhetoric and belittling rhetoric, so, on both sides of the aisle, and in infotainments, sources that maybe for some of the community they thought were news sources. And I'm thinking like Bill O'Reilly versus the Today. It was not the Today Show. What was the show with that spawned the Colbert Report?
The Daily Show.
The Daily Show.
Okay. Kind of the what's interesting about that show is it's a comedy show,
right.
really, but now it's like established as like news. Like they interview presidents and like talk about things and like you're like, wait,
Well,
I thought this was a comedy show.
it's infotainment. And the thing that I was kind of, they do bring in, we're bringing in somebody serious, and then we're going to laugh a little bit,
Yeah.
But what really kind of worried me was sort of the putting down the other side.
Interesting.
Saying, you guys are idiots. I despise you. I think you are small. I think you are less. I think you are nothing. And it was happening on both sides, and it kind of felt a little bit like a boxing match. It's kind of, ooh, he got a good one. And then you started to hear in the vernacular people say things like, he destroyed him. I'm like,
oh my goodness. My buddy and I were talking about this, how all the news now it's a headline, Trump destroys Pelosi with news, and then it's like, Pelosi obliterates the right on this, and it's like, it's never just like a normal headline where it's like, this happened. It's like somebody destroyed and demolished every thought or thinking process that they created, and just the hammer comes down.
And I thought, this is going to lead us to a place, and I remember this is going to lead us to a place where we can't talk civilly, right? And I remember back then I had been invited to become a member of the United Way Young Leaders Group, which is really a fancy way. It's kind of like being invited to be a member of the National Geographic Society. It's like you get to be a member of our group and give us a lot of money so we can help the poor, And I thought, okay, that's cool. But it was really interesting because this was a group of people between the ages of maybe 30 and 45 that were progressing in their careers, and their companies thought that they had leadership potential in the future. And so it's kind of like, let's put these kids together, get them involved in kids, right? That, from my perspective, those are kids.
Yeah.
Let's put these kids together, get them donating to social causes, get them engaged in community leadership, and maybe when they're older and wealthier, they'll be able to do some good things for the community. That was kind of the thought behind it. But I remember sitting in some of those meetings and watching that ethos come into the meetings. There was a lawyer, a friend of mine who's still a really good friend of mine, but pretty far left in his views, that was in that meeting, and he was kind of the chair of the meeting. And then another friend of mine, still a great friend of mine, pretty far right in his views, working from a bank, one from a law firm, one from a bank, and I remember him talking about a policy statement. We were talking about going up to the knob. They thought that was a funny little joke. It's not Capitol Hill, it's the Capitol Knob in the state of Utah, and proposing some policy. And it had to do back then with pre-kindergarten education for single moms, for the children of single mothers. And I remember that this chair saying something like, I can't believe that anybody would oppose this. That is just idiocy. People who can't see that single moms' children need help with reading are idiots. And I thought, because there had been the opposing view that had been expressed was, we really need to inspire families to take care of education more. We shouldn't come into families and take away that role. Families should educate, kids. And they were just talking about different ways rather than using governmental ways. Very Republican sort of, standard, right?
Sure.
But there was no comment about the other side being less than, or being an idiot, or being stupid or devalued until that first comment came in. And then as time went on in those meetings, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of back and forth of belittling each other, rather than just talking about the merits of educating the children of single mothers through a public policy and a public effort versus doing it through church, family, um, free market efforts. Like if there's a real need for kids to get educated, somebody will come up with a business that says, we'll teach your kids how to read, you know.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the argument back and forth. And which one of those is better, right? But it turned into, I'm right. And not only are you wrong, but you're less. You're nothing.
Yeah, like what you are thinking is actually bad or evil or terrible, or you're not a good person because you think that.
And then you hear and you're like, whoa, you put me on my heels. And for some people, then they hear somebody intelligent on the other side of that argument say, now, wait a minute, you little moron. Here's a better view than you. And by the way, you are nothing. And some people start to say, yeah, you know,
Yeah.
take that. Because I can't come up with my own argument. But
Yeah.
right now, anyway, you give me a couple of years and I'll come up with an argument. But here's some intelligent talking head saying something like, oh, yeah, that was a good punch back. I like that guy. I'm gonna latch my little dinghy onto his boat. We're gonna see where this takes me, and I think that source. So, but it goes back answering your question. I think initially it's like, how do we get more ratings for the Bill O'Reilly show? How do we get, more ratings for the Mayor show? How do we get more ratings for the Daily Show? We engage people. Sex is old. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's dressing, sexy, and everybody's talking about sex. Oh, let's engage people through anger and hatred and despise
Hmm.
the other, and that really does engage people. If
It's
you want
the
to
old,
engage somebody in public, go punch him in the face. That will engage them.
yeah, I mean, it's the old kind of media saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah,
Like that's kind of the thing now. And I don't, so it's been bad, of course, I mean, you're talking about how many 20, 30 years ago when this was something that was starting to kind of mull around in your head, like, huh, this is interesting. Now, fast forward to like 2016, and you have kind of the epitome of a guy in Trump that's going to punch the other side in the face.
mm,
And so this group of people, magically, he's like, oh, I'm going to grab these people. And, Trump's not even really a Republican kind of guy or conservative kind of guy. He's more of he's more liberal. He donates to liberal causes. He's a New Yorker, all these things. But he sees this kind of hole, this kind of void that says, and he says, I'm going to, it's amazing to me to think that this guy that has golden toilets and a giant 737 airplane that can relate to the deep south or to like middle America, where those people are in many cases very impoverished and in just a far, I mean, it's so diverse, the socioeconomic divide between a Trump and somebody in some of the areas that were like, this is my guy. But to your point, I think he filled a void of like, I'm going to punch these guys in the face. Media, fake news, other side, not establishment, things like that. And people were like, that's my guy. I've been feeling this forever. Now there's a guy that can say it.
yeah. Well, and this is a skill set that he had clearly been developing over decades in his business. It's just
Yeah.
punch the other guy in the mouth,
Yeah.
and deal with the lawsuit later, and just have a great, and learning the intricacies of what works in a lawsuit, and how you get around things, and what you can say, what you can't say, what you can get away with, what people just aren't going to be bothered with trying to chase down. Because if there's too much volume, what do you go after?
Yeah. You know
So
what?
here's the skill set, and he walks into that setting, and I completely agree with you. Not a Republican, not a politician at all. And some people love that about him. He's not a politician. He's going to drain the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
He just kind of lit a match and just said, I'm going to do this to the whole thing. And then people are like, yes, that's what I've wanted. I've just kind of wanted
just this drain the swamp, just light a fire in there, just do something. What I thought about, and I don't know, this just came to my mind uh, when you're talking about how sex used to be the thing. It used to be kind of the media thing. It used to be the thing that kind of led, our persuasion and things like that, and caught our attention. It's interesting that I think the corollary between like what is going on in that world, like for instance, you take Trump, kind of a sleazy guy, really, like morally, he's kind of like morally void when it comes to that. And I'm listening to what you're saying about that's kind of that kind of stuff. The sex stuff doesn't do anything anymore because everybody's doing it, everybody's having it. It doesn't matter anymore. Everybody's wearing whatever they want to wear. We're kind of bleeding the lines of what gender is. All these things now. And so a guy like Trump, that's kind of morally bankrupt when it comes to stuff like that. But like that's fine. He's gonna burn it all down anyway. He's gonna punch those guys in the face. I'm okay with that part of it. It doesn't bother
Yeah.
me anymore. But it kind of makes sense because you said, well, things have kind of changed. It's not that anymore.
No, I mean, we've been the frog in the pot over the past few decades, just
Yeah.
being exposed more and more, to violence and everything that sort of normalizes that. I mean, I remember being a kid and watching my parents talk about Richard Nixon, and then becoming aware as I was a little bit older teenager, reading the book All the President's Men and going, holy crap, this guy was really corrupt. And in that he was hiring people to do everything they could do to get him reelected that was not legal, to do, and threatening people and all sorts of terrible things. And even in a conservative family, we were grateful as a family when he stepped away.
Yeah.
And we were upset when President Ford pardoned him. And
Huh.
I remember the ethos of looking at Jimmy Carter and going, I don't like any of his policies, but we need someone nice right now.
Yeah.
Kind of feels like that's what we're doing with Joe Biden a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
then you had, Ronald Reagan come in, and he was kind of like, I mean, he may have started this a little bit. He had I don't know if you saw any of his debates, but you should go back and look at them because they're very interesting. He would say this over and over again with Mondale in his second election. He did it more than anything. But Walter Mondale would say anything, and Reagan would go, there he goes again.
Interesting.
That was his first, that was how he started just about every response.
Kind of a passive aggressive way to
Just say,
alleviate any truth. Like this guy's not telling the truth.
can you believe this guy? I mean,
Interesting.
there he goes again. And then he would say something that, Americans who had been just embarrassed by the Iranian kidnapping of these American students. We had hundreds of students in Iran back then. We had cultural interchange once. It was really interesting. But just embarrassed by that, and we were being embarrassed by the Russians in the Cold War. We weren't feeling good about ourselves. And here comes Reagan and says, we can be pleased, we can be proud of being Americans, and we're not going to stand up for any terrorists. Anybody does anything against us, we're going to smack them. And he did.
Yeah.
And he sort of, brought that sense of, no, we're not going to stand for this anymore. But those kind of sentiments come into the public conscious. And in meantime, in the media, we're seeing more sexualization, we're seeing more violence. In preparation for the Super Bowl, I went out and bought CBS All Access for a month, and
Right.
$10, man, that's a lot of money to
Yeah.
pay for. And what I had seen some advertising about CBS that they were doing this Picard show, and I'm old, so Star Trek: The Next Generation.
That's
I mean, I
great.
was in
Yeah.
like 30s when that came out, right? So I thought, well, let's watch Picard. So I just kind of turned it on with my family in the room, and I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old that aren't even watching. I don't think they're playing video games, and my wife's in there. She loves Jean-Luc Picard, the character, so she's like, oh, Jean-Luc Picard, and we're watching this, and the second scene of this, what I would assume would be a family movie, a guy gets a knife thrown right into his chest.
Hmm.
And it doesn't cut away from him. It's like boom, oh, and blood's coming out, and he falls on the ground. And my little 12-year-old looks at me and goes, "What was that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we would have turned that one off right now."
Now he's engaged.
He is engaged. But I thought, man, that I should have prefaced this story by saying I stopped paying for cable like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I just haven't had that stream of this is what's normal America, coming into
Yeah.
my for a long period of time. And that was shocking, just shocking to me that a murder like that on a show that, and I don't know, maybe I didn't check my sources well enough. Maybe it was rated R. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I was just shocked. And I think we are, like you said, I think you're right. We have become just accustomed to bad behavior, and it's terrifying. When Clinton lied about his affair with Monica Lewinsky, we were up in arms about that lie. We were like,
It seems like nothing now.
lie. Now the president lied every single day
Yeah.
that he was in office.
You
It's just,
know, it's funny because you take what I'm noticing is, of course there's hypocrisy, but it's not even like, you can't even, the hypocrisy that comes from politicians, and doesn't matter what it is nowadays, it is so thick that it's like you can't even take what they're saying at their word anymore. Doesn't matter what it is. You have, I think I was talking about this the other day, and it sounds like Reagan may have laid this groundwork of like, look at this guy, he's doing it again. He's gonna tell a lie again, like you know. And so politicians now are kind of doing this game where I think what's really dangerous, if we're talking directly about politics, is that we're saying, like in 2016, Hillary Clinton and a lot of the groups said the election was stolen in terms of Russia collusion, all these things. They got him elected, and then Hillary Clinton said she never accepted that he won, and all that kind of stuff. But that was this big, like everybody said, okay, yeah, that's true, but whatever, whatever, whatever. And then the Russia collusion thing comes out. Okay, it didn't happen, things like that, but whatever. It turns out that it may have been them that were doing things. Okay, whatever, the hypocrisy there. But then we have Donald Trump that full on, brick on the pedal, goes all in on it being stolen and all these things. And you could make arguments that there were some things that were shady and irregular and things like that, but I feel like there's a couple things that are bad precedent. That's one, that no election's fair anymore.
yeah, that's
That
a really good precedent.
that we are now going to impeach presidents. I mean, Joe Biden's going to get impeached, in terms of there's going to be articles of impeachment at some point, just because we can do it now. It doesn't matter. It's not a high crime or misdemeanor. It's just, if I don't like you, to your point, you're bad, you're evil, you don't agree with me, impeach this guy. Now we're going to just start doing that now. We're going to impeach, impeach, impeach. And I just don't, like, where do you go from there? As people that are like, I just want things to be somewhat normal, but where do you go from there?
Well, we're treading in dangerous waters, and we've been here before. I mean, it happened mostly in Europe, but you had, not the Nazi Party was this peripheral, crazy right-wing little group that had an aggressive liberal government before it, and faked the burning of a building to kind of rise to power. We're going to bring peace, stability, and people kind of glommed onto that. And then as crazy things came out, as the leadership started doing really crazy, cruel, bad things, the people are like, those are bad things, but look at all the good they're doing.
And look at where we're already in. We're here. We're invested.
Here. I'm supporting. I'm fully vested. Same different thing happened in Russia and the right, where you have these terrible right-wing people that were just crushing the people and not giving them any hope of getting out of poverty at all, and just living off all of their labor and making their lives extremely extravagant. I mean, this has happened again and again throughout history, right? I mean, France, and I mean, you just saw it over and over again with the French Revolution. But and then you have an intellectual leftist come in and say, "We're done here. We're
Yeah.
cleaning. We're going to drain this swamp," right?
Yeah.
And his policies in the early days, you could argue, man, he was there. There were some things there that probably needed to be done. But at the same time, you're like, well, wait a minute, you're taking away a lot of people's freedoms as you're doing this. And then his follow-up, Stalin, oh my gosh, one of the
Yeah.
worst human beings that has been on the planet. So we have the capacity as we move towards the periphery of our political spectra. If in the middle we don't say, hey, we're not going to put up with this kind of behavior, we run the risk. Imagine if the people fighting Trump over the past 4 years were standard liberal politicians. What if you had a Trumpian type character, a Machiavellian, right, on the
Mm-hmm.
left? Bernie Sanders wasn't that way. His
No.
policies might have been, but he wasn't that way. But what if you had a Trump-like character on the left come in and say, I'm going to just punch you in the mouth every day for 4 years, like you've been doing, and we're going to just make this country into, the
What we
leftist
think.
view, what we think it should be.
Yeah.
And if we're going to have sort of this sort of normal life you just mentioned, who knows what that is anymore, but a calm, peaceful, secure place where people respect each other and listen to each other's opinions, and we have, work security and food security and sanitation security and domestic, and international security. There's going to be somebody on the left and somebody on the right that sells us they're the only way that's going to happen. And
That's
people,
probably one of the biggest pet peeves I have in terms of politics. And it is, if you don't choose this idea or this ideology or this person or this movement, the end is nigh. Like, if you do not do this, then it's over, and it's on both sides. It's that's all of the talking points now. If you don't do this, then the country's over. If we do this, the country's over. It's always the country's over, and it doesn't allow anybody to it doesn't allow us to actually drill into policies and like be educated about things, because it's only if you don't choose this, then it's over.
yeah,
That's what our choices are. It's never like, this is my thing. I think I can probably get behind a few policies of almost anybody, as long as they're not, trying to break the law or they're racist or any of these things, that these kind of pillars that you're like, okay, I'm not going to go down that road. But you take a guy like Bernie Sanders that was kind of cut out of the Democrat Party. They're like, he was actually pretty popular. He was, like you said, kind of the Trump. He's like that guy a little bit,
Well, he had extreme views and he was loud, but he was a politician. He wasn't
Yes.
a Trump businessman. He wasn't
Yeah.
going to come in and hurt you in ways that you didn't know how to respond to, like Trump did.
Exactly. And the Democratic Party saw that, okay, this is going to divide us. And then the Republicans will just continue to win because you got this faction that's going to divide us. And he's going to pill off 10, 20% all the time. So we need to get him in our camp, but we need to push him away, So, but I'm sure I could agree on policies or policy views that Bernie Sanders has. I'm sure I can agree with a lot of things, like on healthcare. I'm sure I can agree with some things that he says. And likewise, I'm sure, and I do agree with the policies in terms of maybe 60, 70% of the things that Trump did and was behind. And here's my point is, we need to get to a place where we say, this is just my belief, I am 60, 70% for this person because I have my own views and I don't align with this person 100% because it's a human and it's one human and it's one movement and it's not my movement. It's not my beliefs because I'm evolving in my beliefs. I'm 37, so I'm evolving. I'm changing. But I generally agree with certain things that this person purports or these policies. Why is it that we have to say 100%? This is essentially, this is a prophet, this is Jesus, this is God, this is that person on both sides. Why can't we just say, I'm kind of like 60, 70%, so that's why I voted this way, but I can see where you're coming from and I like these points of view. Let's bring those ideas to the table.
Yeah, this is one of the things I treasure about the way our country was set up was laws are supposed to be made by people who have to compromise.
Yeah.
You can't make a law unless you get enough votes, and so you have to come to a compromise. And when people say, Congress isn't working, I just step back and smile and go, it's absolutely working
That's the
exactly.
point of it.
They can't come to compromise, so there shouldn't be a law. If you can't get most of the people in the room to say that's a good idea, buses should stop before they cross train tracks. That's reasonable.
Well, the thing is, what we're told or what we're led to believe is you cannot compromise with X.
Yeah.
You do not compromise with Y. And it's become like there's certain things you don't compromise with in terms of like beliefs and things like that. But generally, generally you can compromise about things. And that is completely removed. And now the mantra is you do not compromise with this. You do not compromise with people's lives. You don't compromise with this. People are going to die if this happens. The country's over if this is going to happen. If you don't pass this, it's all, if you don't, you cannot compromise. And so the whole idea of Congress and the whole idea of the bird that has two wings to fly instead of one, or else it's spinning in circles, like it doesn't. Now we're just to a point of if you don't do this, then you're bad. If we're just completely divided. So then what do we do to change it as armchair people just sitting here, really grown up in two different generations? But like, what do you do here?
Yeah. The situation, and I'll get to that question, but the situation reminds me of an old stick that Steve Martin used to do back when he was a comedian rather than, I don't know what, he's a banjo player now, I think. But
I guess.
He had this thing where he would say, if you ever hijack a plane, you got make your reasonable demands, but always throw in one crazy thing so that if they catch you, you can plead insanity. So he'd say, I want $1 million, I want a getaway car, and I want the letter M stricken from the English language, and and I always thought that was really funny, but it's become sort of the problem with this one-sided political view. It's kind of like if you read somebody's platform, they've got that letter M stricken from the English language clause in there. And so, you're like, I think everybody should have a good job. I think taxes should be lower, but they should cover our expenses. That's the truth. I think that everyone who believes this should be shot.
Like, okay, there's the insane part.
There's the insane part. But wait a minute. If I don't vote for all of this, then I'm bad and nothing. And I think we have to do two things. I think one of the things that I see that you're doing is just calling all of this into question so that reasonable people can say, wait a minute, I don't have to either vote with Bernie or vote with Trump. I can, think my own thoughts here. I think that's really important. And then I think the other thing we have to do is we have to look at things that work in history. And one of the things that I've learned, Darren, when I was at the University of Utah, I came back from a church mission. I'm at the University of Utah, and I wanted to take a world's religions class because I didn't know enough about world religion. I just didn't know anything about world religion. I knew a lot about my religion, and had a professor that wasn't interested in teaching us about the religions of the world. His bent was to try to destroy anybody's belief in any religion at all. That was where he was going, But one of the things that I learned, I was required to write an essay during that class. What if Jesus Christ was just a man? And I struggled with that assignment for a long time. And then I thought, I can do this as an intellectual exercise. He's still, so if you just think he was somebody who was just kind of growing up in an environment where The religious leadership had a lot of rules over the people, and the Roman leadership had a lot of rules over the people, and the people were really struggling. You could step across a line and be taxed into jail or be nailed to a tree, depending on who you offended. I
Yeah.
mean, that was a really tough society to grow up in. And we talk about being, the government is oppressing us because, like, what? Have you read history? I
Yeah.
haven't had any of my neighbors nailed to a tree yet. Um, if that happens, we've stepped back a few thousand years. But oh man, I'm so sorry. I'm old. My thoughts will come to me again. They're coming around. I can see.
You
Oh,
can see them. Yeah.
so Jesus Christ says, love one another. If they come for you and they take your cloak, give them your coat. If somebody punches you in the right side of your face, turn the other cheek and say, go ahead. That's what it means.
Yeah.
It means go ahead and hit me on the other side of the face. It means no matter what you do, I am going to love you. I am going to pray for you. I am going to try to do nice things for you. So I think that's one of the reasons that this 33-year-old man, if you believe he was divine or not, doesn't really matter from a certain perspective. He had the best podcast of all history, and he never recorded anything or wrote anything. I mean, his views have influenced more people. There are more people that are Christians today than any other religion on the face of the earth. And this is 2,000 years later. And whether he was divine or not, that's a pretty good mantra, right?
Absolutely.
And I remember when I was a young man reading a book by Og Mandino, who was a Christian man, who wrote a book about the greatest salesman in the world, how to be a great salesman. It's still a fantastic read, short book written in English. People can get through it. But I couldn't get past chapter 2. In chapter 2, he said, if you're going to be a great salesman, you need to look somebody in the eyes and think to yourself in your heart, I love you. He says, if you really mean it, I love you, it will change the way your face looks. It will unwrinkle your brow, which is hard to do at my age. It will produce a warm feeling of love in you for the other person that they can't deny is there. And I think that force was extraordinarily powerful in Roman days. It brought people out in droves from Jewish religion, from Roman, pantheistic religion, right? To I want to think differently. I don't like the way this is going. I don't like this. You do something wrong, you get nailed to a tree.
It seems a little severe.
and we're kind of there almost. We're not there physically, but we're like, you do something wrong, I destroyed you.
Yeah, or we take you off all your platforms, we get rid of you, we try to erase who you are.
Well, let me just share this one cute little story of something that happened not too long ago. So you'll know this area fairly well. I'm driving north on 89 State Street in North Salt Lake, and I cross Center Street. This is downtown North Salt Lake, huge metropolis. And there's a little
metropolis of like I don't know. Now it's like apartments.
That's right. It is a metropolis of apartments.
It used to be random car lots, but now it's just apartments.
It's just apartments for Salt Lake. But anyway, I was driving with my boys. There's 2 lanes on this northbound road. I'm in the left-hand lane. We're driving through the intersection, and I say to my boys, what do you guys want for lunch? And one of them looks over and goes, Atlantis Burger. And it's right there. It's the first thing on the corner as you go through that intersection.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great idea. I could use some grease at this time. So I look over my shoulder. I don't see anybody. I'm in a big 2016 EnviroKiller GMC, and I don't see the car that's over there. And I get through the intersection. I throw on my blinker, and I don't jump into the first entrance of the restaurant. I jump into the second, which is really the exit. But I just screech over 2 lanes and jump in that exit. I totally cut a guy off that I didn't see. He comes into that parking lot behind me and he pulls up right alongside me and he is hot. He is so mad.
Yeah.
And he just jumps out of his car and he is swearing and he is big. I mean, you know me, I am a stick. I don't have any muscles.
You are
But
tall though.
I am tall. I'm tall. That does help me. He jumps out of his car and he's just yelling. And I don't know what possessed me, Darren. I did not think of this, but I jumped out of my car.
Oh, Chris Wood's getting after it.
I'm going after it, man. And so I jump out of my car, but of course I'm Chris Wood, right? So I don't have a swear word. I don't have that in my armament. I just don't have that. And so I start yelling at him though, and I go, I am so sorry. And he looks at me and he's like, and I go, I totally cut you off. I didn't even see you. I had no business making that lane change. I totally cut you off. I am so sorry. And he looks at me and he's still shouting at me, and he's like, yeah, you did. And I said, I probably ruined your day. He goes, yeah, it was horrific. And I go, I love you, man. And he goes, no, this guy is just jacked. He's got tattoos everywhere. And he looks at me and he goes, can I get a hug? And I go, yeah. And we give each other the biggest bro hug. And I go, dude, you scared the crap out of my kids. They've never heard words like that. Could you apologize to them? And we're still kind of yelling,
Yeah.
And so he pops his head in the car and I see my kids go, they're scared of this man. And he's like still yelling at them. And he's like, I'm really sorry that I used bad words in front of you kids. But then we seriously shook hands and we walked away. And I thought, and I was shaking. I was physically shaking from this incident.
Oh, adrenaline, all that stuff. You're just
Yeah,
going for it.
And then I'm thinking to myself, why did I get out of that car? What came over me? How did I pop out of a car and start yelling at someone? That didn't make any sense at all. I mean, I was 2 seconds away from being on the ground
Yeah.
with my kids sitting in the car. I mean, I should have just driven off or something, driven to a police station. But I think what you're doing, Darren, in bringing people together to converse is really important right now, and showing people that it's okay to have different opinions and it's okay to talk about them, but we need to respect each other. And I feel like that's what you're doing. But I would add, I think we need to be aggressive with love, because that's really the only thing that brought us out of the Roman age.
Yeah.
that and the hordes coming from the northeast. It might have been the axe, but I'm gonna
I've been thinking that I totally agree with you. Like, people need to talk to each other. People need to be more open. People need to understand that everybody has a different backstory, and some of them are harder than others, and some of them some of them are really bad, really terrible, and really hard. And people, even especially now, are going through a lot of things right now, mentally, physically. There's a lot of things going on. So I think people need a higher power. I'm Christian, you and I are. I think you need a higher power. I don't think it needs, at this juncture, I don't think it needs to be Jesus. I think it needs to be something bigger than yourself. I think to look, like you're saying, to love, and to, whether it's meditation or yoga or something, that I would say that I think Jesus is the way, but I think something that makes you not look towards politicians or social media influencers or celebrities or athletes. All those are good. All those are fine to look at and look at as role models, however you want to look at them. But to step back and say, I'm going to center myself to something higher than that, bigger than that, and something that's going to allow me to think of other people in a better light, instead of what this person says or that person says or that influencer or that politician or what that person says. A way to step back and say, I'm okay because I have something bigger than that. I have something bigger than that that's a part of my soul. And I think the younger generations aren't getting that.
Mm.
I think the younger generations are getting influencers and politicians and movements and celebrities and sports more than ever. Those are kind of the avenues that people like. That my kids think, for instance, this podcast, YouTube, anything like that. Like if you just do that, you become a millionaire. You're right. Like if you
I'm hoping this for you, Darren. I really.
I don't think it's gonna be from this, but you know what I'm saying. Like younger kids think that if you do that kind of stuff, you become famous, and then you become wealthy, and then all the things that come with that. That's what happens. And as you get older, of course, they'll learn some of those things. But I just think something bigger than yourself is needed.
I love that thought. And both of us, as you grow up, you can't help but to have your view expanded and fall into, different settings. And I have dear friends who are atheistic in their views, and I have close friends that are Jewish. I have close friends that are Muslim. I have close friends that are Hindu, Hindi, believing people. A lot of people just in philosophy. I love to learn what makes other people tick and what is the thing that inspires them. And there's so much good out in the world, and you really can learn so much from other people if you're willing to, and from the things that they treasure, from the things that lift them up. I completely agree with you. We all need to be aware of that. We need, people of high accomplishment, because all the people that you just mentioned are sort of people of high accomplishment in their areas. We need people of high accomplishment in philosophy, and people in high accomplishment in moral behavior and in love and in serving. And they're there. You can still find them, but we need to point them out more.
The reason I started thinking of that was the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, the new justice of the Supreme Court. She seems like a rock star. It seems like a check mark of a person. Like that seems like a really good person, a really good role model. As I have 3 girls, I'm thinking of role models for girls, and I don't know how we can't just agree on that as a society and say that's a good person. That's a person to role model. And even like a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you can disagree with a lot of kind of her positions and kind of her dissents and some of the things that she purported and stuff like that. But that's a good person. Like that's somebody you can look towards that progress certain things that maybe you don't agree with, but that's an accomplished good person. But yet there's 2 people that are probably very similar in Amy Coney Barrett and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, probably very similar, but we are told they're completely different. They're nothing alike. They're a revocation of each other. They're nothing. They couldn't be further from the same. And I'm thinking, I think that they're probably both really good people. They seem like really good, accomplished people and really strong people. Even if I disagree with either of them on certain things, but they seem like good people. They seem like good role models. But we again just kind of divide that stuff. But I did want to ask you some stuff because you are a doctor. Obviously, I think the reason we're probably more divided and probably more, at each other's throats is because 2020 has been a year where people have been isolated, people have been scared. Media's played into that. Everybody, we're in a really uncharted time, really, really uncharted with COVID. And there's so many opinions out there. I mean, I will tell you, I did a podcast on COVID, and all I did was just, because I'm not an expert, I just went through the CDC's website and just talked about the things and the things to look at and all those sorts of things. And that's the highest listened to so far, because that's last year, 2020, 3 of the top Google searches were COVID related. So that's what everybody's consuming. And so, just your general thoughts on like the past year and COVID and what's going on.
Yeah, it's been terribly stressful. I mean, we talk about the biggest stresses people can have are things that change their standard life. And COVID has changed everything for everybody all at once. We
Across
are
the world.
across the world, around the entire world, and we're so stressed out. And when people are stressed, they tend to not be at their best. And I think one of the things we have to do is be kind and patient with each other and cut each other some slack. And, but I do one of the things a couple of things that really concerned me about COVID were if it hadn't happened during an election year, that was sort of the worst thing that could happen because so many things became politicized that didn't need to be. And I saw, the media, um, the 24/7 COVID-19 is killing people,
It's still
I'm like,
there. I mean, there's still a
um,
ticker on every single website, every single thing. And again, I've talked about this at length with a lot of my friends. My best friend, his brother-in-law just passed away from COVID, and it's a horrible, horrible thing.
it is.
But the th-
But fear isn't fighting it. That's the problem.
yes, that's
I
the
guess that's
real
what I'm saying
struggle.
is that, if people could step back and understand that this is a deadly virus, that's one thing we got to clear out. This is not something,
Check mark. It's
no,
something to
this
take
is killing
serious.
people. It's something to take serious. But there are real world ways that are not invented to stop the spread of this thing. And it's really not that hard. Um, but it's become so politicized that it's like you can't say those things without offending half the room, you know. But from a physician's perspective, I interact with a lot of people who haven't been sick,
Hmm.
uh, and I might get sick, but I think it's going to be tough because I understand how this virus is passed, and this virus is passed 95% of the time by those little tiny virus particles being inside of droplets that come out of people's breaths. And so, and people form this sort of moist cloud of breath around their head. That's where the breath comes out, right? If you're indoors, that breath cloud can expand a little bit. If you're outside, it gets blown away a little bit easier, right? So, but it varies in size. It can be anything from a few inches outdoors in wind to 10 feet, but
Interesting.
most of the time it's about 6 feet big indoors if you're just sitting in calm settings. So one of the rules is just to not walk into somebody else's breath cloud. Now, if I'm wearing a mask and you're wearing a mask indoors, guess what that does to both of our breath clouds? It moves it down to about 2 feet. So if we're both wearing a mask in a grocery store, if I stay 2 feet away from you, the chances that I get that virus are really low. Now I'm staying 6 feet away
Sure.
just because that's what's been drilled into our heads, right? But and most people that I see are wearing masks in a grocery store. I hardly ever see anybody. I mean, sometimes you'll see somebody that is
Yeah.
obviously annoyed by what the mask does to their nose, or puts it under their chin or something like that. That's not doing anything to decrease a breath cloud. But if you stay 6 feet away from those people, very difficult for that virus to spread from that person to you. So, I find that you can go sit in a restaurant. I find that you can go to a play. I think you can go to a jazz game if you're not sitting in somebody else's breath cloud.
Interesting.
If you are, then you're playing a game where they're either infected or they're not.
Hmm.
If they're not infected, this is no problem. We've been doing this our whole lives, right?
Yeah.
They are infected. This thing is pretty contagious. And I'm probably going to bring that home. And maybe one or two of my other family members are going to get it, you know?
Do you think the issue is, uh, uh, from your perspective, like the issue is that it's highly contagious is the real big problem. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously it's a bad disease, but it seems to be very contagious.
Well, what's really interesting, let's compare how contagious it is. So with our little behaviors, our disgruntled mask wearing and our disgruntled 6 feet away, and I'm not doing that. Oh, I'm going to the grocery store. I probably better do that. you know, kind of behavior. I just checked on this yesterday. Intermountain Healthcare has this service called Germ Watch, where they pull a database of all of the lab results of every single one of their clinics, every single one of their hospitals, the Utah Department of Health, which is all of their clinics, and the University of Utah. All of the tests that are done on viruses get pulled into this one database, and they take a look at it daily, and they can see what viruses are showing up in our community. Last week, 7 whole days, there were only 3 viruses detected in the state of Utah, the entire state of Utah. It was COVID-19, which was by far 99% of the virus that was detected, rhinovirus, which is the common cold, and adenovirus, which is the pink eye virus. Okay. Now those other 2 viruses are pretty easy to spread from surfaces. So you touch a surface, you wipe your eye, you're done. You got it.
Yeah.
really, really contagious because the virus persists. It doesn't dry up and die. It doesn't fall apart. But guess what's not in our, guess what we had 0 cases of last week in the state of Utah? Influenza, RSV, pertussis. And I could give you another list, but most people that are listening to this won't know, won't care.
All of them.
But these, seriously, there's like 10 viruses that are typically filling our hospitals at this time of year, January, February, that we didn't see at all last week. Not a single case, not a single positive test. Now,
so what do you
COVID,
say to that? Yeah.
well,
break that down a little bit.
That's extraordinary. I've never seen that in my life. That means that these viruses are all respiratory spread viruses, except for the 2 that are still hanging around. Rhinovirus and adenovirus are more can be spread by surface. You can pick those up by somebody sneezing and coughing in your face. Don't get me wrong, but these other ones are mostly breath cloud related. Okay, our behaviors, as disgruntled as we feel about them, have shut down those other viruses, and yet COVID is still spreading. It's not actually spreading as fast as it was a couple of weeks ago. We only had like 2,000 new cases yesterday, whereas a few weeks ago we were seeing 5,000 cases a day. But that is still daily spreading in the thousands. So you're right, this is a very contagious virus. We know that from people in the state of Utah who've tested positive for COVID, 37% of them had no symptoms when they tested positive. 54% of people either had mild symptoms, a runny nose, a sore throat, all the way to this is the worst case of flu I've ever had in my life. But 96% of the population is not going to the hospital. They're getting this. They're either having nothing, or they're having a cold, or they're having the worst flu ever, but they're all getting over it. And when that kind of thing happens, and it happens with every single virus, we all feel like it's no big deal. Why are people scared of this?
Right.
And to a certain extent, that's absolutely true. People should not be as fearful of this. I mean, 96% of the time, you're not even going to go to the hospital. Even if you're old, even if you have medical issues.
Correct.
You're probably going to get over this. But it's in the state of Utah, 3.6% of people that are going to the hospital. And it turns out most people that are going to the hospital tend to be between the ages of 25 and 54.
That's interesting.
It's younger people that are going to the hospital, but it turns out that when people our age go to the hospital, we get out. We're there, we get oxygen, we get out. If you have medical issues, if you're over the age of 70, your chances of getting out alive drop, but they don't drop to 0.
Right.
Most people are still getting out.
It's still 90.
It's still
85 to 90%. You're okay, even in those cases, correct?
Even in those cases, 80% of the time, if you get admitted to the hospital, you're coming out alive. That statistic isn't entirely true, because it also includes all the people that died in nursing homes. So if you consider nursing homes hospitals, which I don't, but if you did, then you could say 80% of the time, if somebody was in a nursing home or in the hospital, they got better.
That's over the age of something, and maybe
over the age of
pre-existing.
65, right?
Yeah.
20% of the time, those people were not making it if they got that far, if they got to the point where they needed oxygen. And we're seeing, the number of deaths that we're seeing, last year there were like 250 deaths from automobile accidents on Utah roads. And we haven't even been a year yet, right? And it's coming up in March. We've already had 1,500 deaths from COVID. So this is a really serious, deadly disease. But we could, if we just followed those little rules of mask up, stay away from people, and go the extra mile, wash your hands, right?
Hmm.
We could prevent that spread and just, shut this thing down.
So
It
when you
doesn't
say
have
shut it
to.
down, what does that look like? Because that's an interesting thing that everybody asks. Like, okay, shutting it down, what does that mean? Because originally it was stop the, you know, the this, stop the, what is it, the curve or whatever. Like
Yeah, flatten
slow
the
the
curve,
flatten the
right?
curve. All these things, and it's just, again, here's a perfect example of where w- we've been divided on something like this, where we can just say, even if you're like anti-mask, anti all these things, the government's overreaching, all these things. You can also say, okay, well, we're learning now and we're changing and evolving because this is very new, but we're not allowed to do that. So, what does it look like for if what does it look like?
Well, my sense from reading the medical literature, the things that have been published about what we're studying and what we've learned and what we know and what we don't know. There's a lot of things we just don't know yet, and I'm completely comfortable with that. I think um, people outside of science aren't comfortable with physicians saying they don't know, but there's things we just don't know. We haven't studied yet. Um, what I think, Darren, is most respiratory viruses, including most coronaviruses, because every year we typically have 3 or 4 coronaviruses come through the community, but they just cause cold and sore throat. By the way, this year, all 3 of those, zero. We don't
It's
have any.
crazy. So you would attribute that to the social distancing, the hand sanitization, and the masks.
Absolutely. Um, and things that are driving us nuts, like testing people that are positive for COVID and trying to help them be isolated. It's really difficult to do.
Quarantine style things, yeah.
Quarantine, just it's so difficult to do. But so this virus is already mutating. We've already detected 4 or 5 different subtypes of the virus, and some of them are more contagious. Some of them are more resistant to the treatments we've already invented. What that says is that this virus is probably going to end up looking like influenza virus, where we're going to need a booster shot every year. And vaccine producers are going to say, okay, these are the types we're seeing out in the world. In the fall of 2022, we're going to encourage people to get a booster of coronavirus vaccine when they get their flu shot. And the flu shot is only against influenza virus. It's not against any other subtype of virus. But influenza virus was the virus that killed so many people back in 1918. But that thing mutates and changes all the time. And just by the way that vaccines are produced, you have to judge about 18 months before you start giving the vaccine what subtypes of influenza virus are going to be in that vaccine. And it'll be the same thing with the COVID virus. We'll have to say, okay, these five subtypes are going to, or the proteins that are in those 5 subtypes are going to be in this vaccine that we're going to give to people, so their immune systems can recognize them and destroy them if they ever see them in real life. So what does it take to get back to normal? Well, what it takes is about, from studying other pandemics around the world for hundreds of years, it takes about 70% of the population being relatively immune to that virus to turn it back into, to turn it off, to turn it into something that comes around seasonally. Okay. How do you become immune? Well, we know that people that get the disease develop antibodies enough to prevent them from getting it again for at least 90 days, probably a little bit longer than that on average, but at least 90 days. We've never seen a case of anybody get it again in less than 90 days. But people can get it again. With vaccination, getting one vaccine of the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine produces about the same effect. You have some antibodies build up, but not enough to really prevent you from getting sick long term. If you get that second dose of vaccine, it really raises your immunity to the point where your body is ready to destroy that virus. If you ever breathe it in, it comes in your nose or mouth, you are ready to just jump on it and just obliterate it, right? Like a political argument we were talking. So if you could take a population and vaccinate 70% of them within a 3 years, month period of time, that would turn this thing back into something that came around every once in a while.
Interesting.
And so that's really the push. Now, um, whatever population has had the disease in the last 3 months, plus whatever population has had both doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, or one dose of the Johnson and Johnson or AstraZeneca vaccine, those people are so immune to COVID in the short term that COVID just can't spread through the community. Even if 30% of the people don't get vaccinated at all, a bacteria or a virus will have a very difficult time spreading through a community if 70% of the people it interacts with destroy it. It just can't do it.
Is there
So
any?
that's what we're shooting for. We're trying to get to the point where we could vaccinate, and vaccinate a certain percentage of the population that would be willing to do it, to get that total up to 70%. And you can imagine that's really tough, especially with the messaging about vaccines. They have chips in them that Bill Gates can control us. I used Windows. You had to hit Control Alt Delete like every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I wish
You know, what do you so a lot of people have concerns because it was developed so quickly.
Yeah.
7 months, never been done before. The testing on it was very minimal because you can't do it in that time frame. There are people that are having adverse effects of it. In terms of the amount of people that are getting it and the people that are having adverse side effects is very, very low. That's, of course, people are going to bring out the worst and everything and say, okay, I think there was a doctor that died, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. I've heard now a couple people have said the second doses made them actually feel sick. The first dose was no big deal. Second dose, they actually felt like they had the flu for a day or two. It was a different effect. So, what do you say to that?
Well, I try to tell people what we honestly know about all those things, and help them make their own choice about it. I mean, the reason people get sick after that second dose is because their body already recognizes that this protein that's coming into their body,
so it fights it,
is a bad actor, and we jump on that aggressively, and we release antibodies like crazy that glom onto these proteins so that white cells can come along and just eat them up and destroy them. But we also release a whole bunch of hormones that are kind of like trumpet blasts. All white cells, please go to the shoulder. And those trumpet blasts make us feel feverish. They make us feel achy. They make us feel fatigued. It's part of what they do. For example, one of the things that those hormones do when they get to the shoulder is they make the blood vessels leaky, so that water and white cells can leave the blood vessels and attack these viruses just full on. But when our blood vessels get leaky, it lowers our blood pressure and we feel crappy.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't gotten the flu. We haven't gotten COVID. What we've gotten is our own immune system attacking a protein that you just put into my arm. But that is going to happen to not everybody. We know that probably less than 10% of people experience those types of achiness, fatigue, misery type of reactions with that second shot. But it is much more common in the second shot than in the first shot. It's not, that type of reaction isn't serious. It's actually a really good sign from a medical perspective that your immune system is killer. You are UFC ready to go,
Interesting.
Now, what we do worry about from the vaccine is two things: anaphylactic responses. So your immune system can go so over the top on anything that it can make all of your blood vessels leaky around your whole body all at once. That's what anaphylaxis is. And it's actually your body's response to the vaccine. It's not the vaccine per se, it's your body's response to the vaccine.
Like foreign object, something foreign coming in.
Something foreign, a peanut allergy, a shrimp allergy, anything that causes you to have hives can produce that full body allergy, including ingredients that are in a shot. Some random people will have an allergic response to this vaccine. And we have treatments for that. We can give medication that can stop that leakiness from happening, but it's a serious situation. And that's what people are dying from if they die from the vaccine. The risk of dying from the vaccine is so much lower. than dying from COVID. That as a society, in a scientific community and a political community, we think this is worth doing. It's worth getting this benefit to run that risk. That's with any decision. What's the risk and what's the benefit, right? But it's a very serious risk. But the risk is extremely low. Before these, none of these vaccines are approved by the FDA. They have, two of them have an emergency use authorization. Both of those vaccines were tested with Pfizer in 45,000 people and with Moderna in 30,000 people before they applied for the EUA. Since that time, they've been administered to millions of people across the United States, and we have better data on how they're doing than we have for any vaccine in the history of mankind. And we're seeing very few side effects and very few anaphylactic responses. But that is happening. And like you said, naturally, those things will show up in the news, and they should. They're terrible. You know, we don't want those things to happen. I always, in my mind, if whatever is bad is showing up in the news, is showing up because it's rare.
Yeah.
You know, and so that comforts me a little bit that it's still rare enough that it's showing up in the news and it's just a doctor here and a person there, versus, you know, how many millions of people around the world are dying, you know, from COVID. So, you know, I don't try to convince people they should take it or that they shouldn't take it. I just say, look, this is what we know about it. We know that if people will get, of these first two that came out, if they'll get 2 shots of it at the appropriate intervals, you have a 95% chance of being immune to that virus when it comes into your, when you walk through somebody's breath cloud and breathe that in, your body's going to be ready to destroy it. And from a public policy perspective, if we can get 70% to be immunized, then this thing turns back into a seasonal flu. And every single year, it'll kill its tens of thousands across the United States. But it will, just like flu did in 2019, 2020, influenza killed approximately 24,000 people.
And it kind of trails, I was reading that it trails between like 20 to 60,000. It just kind of depends on the year.
Depends on the year
and like
how
you
well
said,
the vaccine was and all sorts of other things, but that it's seasonal and it comes through. And COVID will do that too. Once we beat it back into submission, it'll come through and it'll kill. And it depends on how it morphs. It'll probably stay with the elderly and people that have, you know, serious medical conditions. But viruses can change, and this is a big concern with influenza, and it's a big concern with coronavirus. If it changes in some way that it becomes more deadly, and what that means is it becomes more likely to aggravate our own immune systems, because that's really what gets us. Then this could become, you know, a more deadly type of virus, but it would most likely still come in a seasonal, you know, way. So I really do feel like your podcast come July, if you invite me back, and I don't think you will, but if you invite me back in July, we won't be talking about COVID other than to say, you'll say, hey, Chris, are you going to get your COVID booster this fall? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Same with my influenza booster, you know.
So are you talking this July or next July, 2022?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I'm hoping that a lot of people will get vaccinated, you know, this spring and summer.
Well, it's becoming available. I think the push. I mean, we've been talking to the older people in our family because they're setting up they're setting up clinics in places like that where they can go during a certain time period. They can register to go get it. Like all of the elderly and pre-existing condition people should be getting the vaccine. Like Absolutely. They should be going and getting that first in line, no questions asked. I mean, if you're above 65 and you know what I mean, you just chart it out. You're this age and just, we don't care. Bring them in and do it.
The problem is that, like I say, unless we get to 70% of the population, then this thing stays in pandemic state, which means, you know, our government leaders are still doing crazy things to us and saying, please mask and social distance and hand wash and, you know, don't do this and that. If we want to get back to, you know, going and watching BYU lose regularly to the U, then in person, sitting side by side, then we've got to immunize 70% of our population, whether they're old or sick or not. And I think within 2 weeks, we're going to have another EUA, probably on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a refrigerated single dose vaccine. That's the kind of vaccine you could put into physicians' offices. So it'll be much more available, like you just said, and people can get it. Right now, only about 55% of Utahns say that they would get the vaccine. If we can get 15% more of those undecideds, then this turns back to, okay, we're good. So I'm going to be an optimistic and say, yeah, next fall, our kids are back in school.
Yeah.
You know,
But are they wearing masks and having screens around their desks?
only
That's the
really
question.
scared people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I don't think
interesting.
so. I mean, I think all, this happened with the polio pandemic, and it happened with the influenza pandemic. Our behaviors and our fears about things linger. I don't know if you ever heard your grandma say something like, "Come inside, you'll catch your death."
Hmm.
That phrase came from 1918, where people would go outside and catch their death.
So I read a little bit about the 1918, flu and what happened. And it's so interesting how similar it was in terms of people wearing face coverings and not getting into communities together, not gathering together and stuff like that. I remember reading like a few lines and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is exactly the same like phraseology 100 years ago.
Yeah, and it was crazy because science did not even know that viruses existed in 1918. The term virus was coined in 1930, and we didn't have microscopes that could see small enough to even prove that these things existed in 1918. But people who are really intelligent, like detective type people, epidemiologists, were figuring out this isn't coming through the water. It's not coming through poop.
Yeah.
It's coming through the air. We don't know how, but it's
And
coming through the air.
people are spreading it to each other.
Right. And so what we have to do is we have to put masks on, we have to separate. But they had no idea what it was. Influenza did not refer to a virus. Influenza referred to a condition, the symptoms, the disease, and the death of the condition.
Well, let me ask you just quickly about the unintended consequences of what's going on. You see, like we were talking about, you always see the bad stuff, but you see a spike in a lot of mental health issues. You see a spike and at a pretty alarming rate, not even just like a little bit, but we've seen a lot of that stuff. What do you do? I mean, my kids are feeling it. I have this little video of my boy, he's 6, Charlie, and he's like into tears. Like you can see it in his face because we say things like, well, it's just not open because of COVID, or we can't do that because, maybe one of our kids isn't sick, but has the sniffles, and we're like, well, we can't go anywhere because we just don't know. And so we got to be careful, and we get, those types of things. And it is absolutely 100% personally seeing it in my kids. I see it every day. I see it in them every single day. To the point where my daughter's learning about the Dark Ages, and she feels like there's a correlation to it.
Well, frankly, I mean, there is this. You're absolutely right, and this is miserable. And I totally accept on behalf of physician kind. I totally accept that we have a huge role in all of that. I mean, we are trying to, save lives. That's our role. And so we do that. But we also recognize that suicides are a way that people lose their lives as well. And lives just get decimated by things that are bad. But I would say that, again, going back to our social media responses and the media that is trying to sell advertising here, having that COVID-19 blast,
Yep.
Blair. I tell my kids, look, I want you to be very, I'm a physician. My patient population is elderly. They're at risk. I do not want to spread the virus to them. As a family, I would appreciate it if we would all follow our, these guidelines so that we can all stay healthy, but also so that these people I interact with can stay healthy. But that doesn't mean that everything is shut down in our family. What I want you to do is pay attention to which of your friends are willing to respect your need to stay 6 feet away from them when you get together. your need to be masked up, them and you. And you can go play with those kids. Um, you know, my 16-year-old just last night was sledding with a group of kids from Bountiful on a sledding hill. I have complete trust in him that he knows how far 6 feet away he is, and he can keep it, even when his friends give him crap for it. And they do,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but he's with them. That's really important to me because he's 16 and he needs to, you know, peers are really important at this age. They're important in forming our thoughts and our behaviors and seeing what's normal. It's kind of like being 16 is kind of like listening to your podcast. It's kind of like, oh, other people are different than me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, so I love it when he's able to get out, and and they've had to invent new ways to get together. Having bonfires in front of a garage in January is not something that we ever did before, but it's something that he does with his friends on a regular basis. It's tougher with my younger kids because kids have a hard time understanding 6 feet away and mask up
Boundaries.
and keep it there, and they have a harder time doing that. And so, you know, what we've tried to do is we've tried to encourage a lot of creative ways of getting together, you know, virtually, but it's not the same. And I
It's
see it too, Darren. I see our kids suffering. The only thing I know is I read this too shall pass.
Yeah.
This is going to go away as we get people vaccinated. And one of the real comforting things for me is reading my wife's grandmother's journal. And she happened to be alive she was in college. She just entered college in 1918,
Hmm.
in the fall of 1918. And she ended up living to be 97 years old. Fascinating woman. In the 30s, during the Depression, she started she was the star of a nationwide radio show called Ida G. Abbott. It was a made-up character that stood for the IGA food stores, Ida G. Abbott, really cute. And she would give, you know, how to make liver appealing to your husband kind of radio shows. But she had this full, rich life. Her husband was a cabinet member of FDR for 3 terms.
Hmm.
He later came back to Utah and became a general authority in our church. And he was a hard smoking, hard drinking guy before he came back and changed and turned his life around at the age of 60. I mean, these guys just had rich lives that they lived. And in reading her life history, the 1918 pandemic, which killed more people than COVID has killed so far, she wrote about it in 2 paragraphs. She said, 1918 was a terrible year. I went to 2 weeks of school before they shut the University of Utah down. We didn't go to class for the rest of the semester. We heard of friends and family members getting sick, and many people died, and it was really terrible. Luckily, nobody in our family died. And then in January of 1919, school started up again, and I went back to school.
And that was it.
That was it. So in a life of 97 years, this pandemic took 2 paragraphs. And I have to remind myself of that and my kids of that. This is a hard time. This is a stressful time. This is a miserable time, but it will pass. And one day you can be an old person sitting on a porch saying, "Get off my lawn and come inside or you'll catch your death," you know, just like my grandma was.
I do think a lot of people feel that way, and I think the biggest gripe I have about it, and I think you and I are talking about this, is the politicization of it, and then just it constantly in our face.
Yeah.
It's constantly in our face. Like, we know it's bad. We
Yeah.
know that people are dying. We know that there's thousands every day that are contracting the virus. We know it all. And we would just like to kind of be relieved a little bit of it constantly being in our faces. We just would like a little break. And tell us some good about it. Tell us, you know, it's really good that most people don't die. It's really good. But obviously they don't want to have people have a sense of, false, confident, like being around people, things like that. But, like, you know, we're really lucky that it's not nearly as bad as it could have been so far. And there's a lot of good in terms of that.
Well, and a lot of things have advanced technologies like what we're doing right now. I mean, this is old hat. This would, a year ago, this would have been really cool. I would have been like, Darren, you're
Yeah.
advanced sitting
Yeah.
here on the Zoom call. Now my kid does this with his buddies. It's like healthcare is changing. We're getting rid of the waiting room. Why why would you
Which
have a
is
waiting room
beautiful.
ever again?
Because what do you guys do when we're waiting for 20 minutes? Like, what are you
This is
doing?
okay. I'll tell you exactly what
Dr.
happened.
Wood, what are you doing?
They're playing foosball in the back office. No, that
That's what everybody thinks. So you go there, your appointment's at 8 a.m. You get there. Please be 20 minutes early. You get there 20 minutes early. Then you sit down. Then you don't see the doctor till 8:20. And you're like, why?
and we hate that. We hate that. Just it's terrible. But what's happening is somebody, and it happens at third appointment of the day. Somebody said they had a sore throat, and then they come in and they have and they're pregnant,
You're like, oh.
and you're like, oh, this is going to take some time,
Yeah.
okay? And suddenly that conversation and the shock and awe and just helping that person get through that moment took 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's surprising it only took 20 minutes. I mean, your life just changed forever.
It is a funny thing how.
And then the next person, and this happens all the time because people know if they're going to get in to see their doc, they got to say something that'll get them in. Like I'm bleeding from my kidneys. But they give a reason, and then when they get in, they tell you what's really going on. And it doesn't happen with every patient, but if it happens 2 or 3 times in a day,
Then you're way back.
But now, totally different. I just spoke with my buddy Mark Breesacker, who's the chief physician executive in Intermountain Healthcare a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "This has really changed how we do everything now, and it's going to change how we do everything in the future. We have learned that 85% of primary care visits can be done over the television, over the a web conference just like this. When people need a physical examination and blood work, we can bring them in just for that. And sometimes that can be done in their car in the parking lot. We have learned that we can text people, your doctor is behind, your Zoom meeting isn't going to happen for another 30 minutes. And that's just revolutionized the experience. I'm still annoyed. You said it was 1, now it's 1:30, but I'm home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You
I,
can
and, I,
still
and I
make
can, or I'm at work and I can do the other things I'm going to do. Okay, now it's time for my Zoom call. Maybe I've got to arrange a different thing, but I didn't have to travel there and travel back. I didn't have to get influenza from somebody in your waiting room, doc. Thank you so much. It's like there's a lot of improvements in every area in lots of different areas of our lives. If we take a step back and look, technology that has been here that we just haven't used has really advanced, and we've started using it. But Darren, I really do feel very hopeful that by this summer, and I'm going to say August, and you're recording this, right?
Yes, I'm gonna put it out to the masses and say this is according to Dr. Wood.
Hey, by August, we will be coming out of our caves and saying, and people will be telling us, it's okay to go to a basketball game. It's okay to go to a football game. It's okay to go to a play. We will still struggle with putting down the COVID behaviors.
Yeah, do you think that it'll be, I envision a place like you're talking about August, I envision a place where there will be people that will still wear masks and social distance and kind of reserve some of those activities until they feel a little more safe. But I think that's a place that I would like to see. I think most people would like to see that, where if I go to a grocery store, I don't have to wear a mask. Maybe it's a situation where if you go to the counter, please have a mask on, but as you're walking through, just social distance, like things like that. Some evolution there where it's like, okay, we've inoculated, we've done a lot of things to stop this thing, but still use these types of precautions, and then feel free to wear a mask, feel free to do certain things like that. Yeah, that's where I hope we get.
I completely agree with you, and that's going to happen mostly, I think, in August, where businesses are going to say, "Do we bring people back?" And I'm talking about service industries where people were working from home, right? Yeah. Do we have people come back to a building? Yeah. Really? Why are we doing that? Why are we hiring this building? What does it do for us? Versus just letting people work from home. But that's really the month where people are going to be like, okay, when you go to the grocery store, what is this new normal? But I predict that if, as we get back together and we realize the numbers are staying okay, that we'll say, we can do this. What I'm really concerned about is, when we go to a grocery store, I'm probably going to give somebody who looks like they're over 70 a wide berth.
Yeah.
It'll
Yeah.
just be in the
kinda,
back of my mind. I'll just kind of
yeah.
like, and if that's happening in the grocery store, is it going to happen in our lives? Are we going to give our 70-year-olds a wide berth and
That's
not interact with them?
a concern.
And so I think it is a concern, and I think we need to sort of come up with ways to remind us that we need to interact with everyone in our families and everyone in our friend and neighborhood groups, and but as we step out of our caves and we realize we're not getting clubbed, then I think we'll feel more confident and more comfortable in doing normal things. And then, just like my grandma's journal, and January came and we went back to school and things kind of went back to normal.
Yeah. I think as soon as we can start to see, I mean, everybody looks at the numbers every day. I don't know. I don't care who you are, but I mean, I would say, it's got to be 80-90% of people look at the numbers every day. And every day that it's lower, it is just like a sigh of relief. And so
Well,
it will be nice once
it's going to go up and down as it goes down.
Yes.
But the sun is coming. That's good for respiratory diseases. Last summer we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and numbers were quite a bit lower than they are here in the wintertime, right?
Yeah.
So that natural heating up, drying out the breath cloud, right? UV light that's destroying virus in our breath cloud, that's coming. That seasonality is coming. If we, including all of your listeners, will just keep doing the stay out of other people's breath cloud, wear your mask, and get vaccinated, then by August I will be right, and my stock will go up.
Yeah. How much investments do you have in this? Oh, it's such a crazy thing. Well,
there is hope. I really think that I think there's a lot of hope for the end of this summer.
I think there's things that you can take that are good. Like, we bought a motorhome last year, and it was because we wanted to get out. And it's something you can do as a family and get out. You can be away from everybody. And it saved us in some respect as far as mentally. Like, we could get out, we get away from people. So that's what I'm always like advocating. Like, do things as a family where you can get out and you can keep the social distancing and the mask and the whatever and the things, but do something other than just staying in your house all the time or doing stuff, the same mundane things. You got to get out and do something, whatever it is. Like, we went to a movie a couple weekends ago, because now you can kind of do it and you can social distance, you can wear the mask, the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, do stuff that kind of gets that serotonin, all the the things, endorphins going, things that like make you happy again.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. It's so important. You go to a movie theater, you're going to be sitting there for 2 hours. Don't be 6 feet away, be 10 feet away. But then guess what? Forget about it and enjoy the movie.
Yeah. And then when you leave, wait till everybody leaves or whatever, and just kind of piddle your way out and go and be away from people. But you're exactly right.
You will absolutely be fine. And we have discovered that there's a waterfall up every single canyon in
yeah, exactly.
And my boys have reached so many peaks in Davis County.
Many drives and many scenic drives. Yeah.
We've gone out. We've tried to support restaurants. We don't typically go in and sit down. We have done that when we feel like we can go in and sit down and be 10 feet away from other people. We've done that, but we've made sure that we're trying to support local businesses.
Get takeout and things like that. Yeah.
All the time. Try new recipes. Reach out to friends and talk to them. Anything you can do, even if it seems artificial, to lift your spirits and to laugh, and to engage and to be with other people is just crucial at this terrible time. So
it's really important. Well, all right. I really appreciate you doing this. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll do it again. It's every time I do this, and I've done a lot of them. Not all of them I posted, but it just makes you feel good because you get to talk.
It's nice to talk to a human.
It is.
We've forgotten that we can do that, right?
That's
it's
the
treat.
It's that scare that you're saying that when you go to the grocery store, you even do it now, even if you're not 100 years old, you kind of gravitate away from people. And it's like, it's not wrong to just say hi to people. say, hey, how you
It
doing?
shocks the pants off them, though. I try to
They're
walk
like-
around people and go, hey, how you doing? And they look at you like,
You're like, you're not supposed to say any words. We're supposed to we're supposed to be like this, tunnel. Don't talk to me, because
don't talk to me.
Yeah. So, anyway, well, it's been fun. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Darren. Thanks for the invitation. I really love doing it with you. Good luck, buddy.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Graybox Podcast.